The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Margot Hoffman with the Partnership for Excellence, and I'd like to welcome you to our third Thursday webinar. Also with us today is Bob Bittner from the Mid-Atlantic Alliance for Performance Excellence. And on behalf of our programs as well as the California Council for Excellence, Performance Excellence Northwest, Oklahoma Quality, Quality New Mexico, the Southwest Alliance for Excellence, we welcome you to this webinar, and we're excited to have the Richland School District with us here today. And you'll meet our speakers in just a little bit. Just a couple quick announcements to make as we get started. First of all, there are handouts in the control panel. There's a handout of the presentation that will be made this morning, and there's also a handout of the introduction slides that I'm showing here, which may have some information that you may want. We are also recording this webinar if you'd like to view it later. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, there's two options. Our preference is that you would type your question in the control panel in the questions box, and we will make sure that our speakers hear them. You can also raise your hand and we can unmute you, but we right now have everyone muted since we have a big group today. I do have a few announcements before we get started, and then Bob will introduce our speakers, and then we'll have time for questions at the end of the webinar before we introduce next month's webinar. Just a reminder that all of our programs oftentimes have events coming up to visit the pages. I know the MAPE program has some Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt training coming up in June if you want to go to their webpage, and the Oklahoma Quality has their examiner training coming up. The Partnership for Excellence, we are starting an application writing web series on Wednesday, and we also have some criteria training called Baldrige Basics and Beyond in June. So please look at these websites if you're looking for events to participate in. Some other events happening more at the national level. The Baldrige Foundation is going to be having a webinar a week from today, and that's just to provide an overview of the state program. So the programs that are hosting this organization or this webinar are part of the Alliance for Performance Excellence. So you'll hear from the Alliance of Performance Excellence. You'll hear some examples from the state programs. But if you want to learn more about how to get engaged with your state program, this is a great webinar to learn about that. And if you go to the Baldrige Foundation website, you can find information to register for this webinar. And then we also want to have you save the date for an upcoming conference that is put on by the Alliance for Performance Excellence, and that's the Baldrige Fall Conference that will take place October 19th and 20th in San Diego. And that will have, national Baldrige recipients as well as some of our state recipients and other performance excellence professionals presenting at that conference. And then before I have our speakers introduced, we just want to thank our organizational members. Most of our organizations are 501(c)(3)s, and we appreciate the support that our organizational members provide to us to allow us to do the things that we do. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Bob Bittner, who will introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Margot, and good morning, everyone. Hey, it's really my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Brian Miller has served as superintendent of Pine Richland School District in Pittsburgh since 2013. He's in his 26th year in education and is responsible for leading a district that has 6 schools, 523 staff, 4,600 students, and an annual budget of $97 million. Pine Richland is recognized as a high-performing school district in Pennsylvania across all indicators. Dr. Miller is in his 10th year as a senior examiner with the National Baldrige program, has 5 years as team lead, and has experience participating in multiple site visits. Dr. Kristen Justice is in her 5th year as assistant superintendent for elementary education and curriculum at Pine Richland School District. Now in her 18th year in education, she has held positions as principal, assistant principal, and German teacher. Dr. Justice has served as an examiner regionally for the Mid-Atlantic Alliance for Performance Excellence and at the national level. And I believe that she has also served on a Mid-Atlantic Alliance for Performance Excellence site visit. So a lot of well-rounded experience. And I think with that, Kristen, am I turning it over to you?
Dr. Miller, actually.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Margot. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. It's great to see that we have some education sector participants in the webinar, but we do have all sectors represented. So we're glad to be with you today. And pursuit of excellence is one of the categories of our strategic plan. And today's presentation is really, we're going to talk a little bit about our journey and what that means inside out, and we'll share a couple specific examples with the group. And so we look forward to any questions. We're open to being stopped at any time. So if something is typed into the text box, that text box, that's great. We can address them throughout the presentation or also at the end. Next slide, Kristen. And thanks to Kristen, who's going to drive this. If you could just take a moment to read what's on this slide. So one of the important, we think probably everybody on this call agrees with this. We understand how challenging the pursuit of excellence is and performance excellence within an organization. But what I wanted to focus on is really in the title, and that's inside out. And so what we believe strongly is that in order to develop and to sustain high levels of performance, it really occurs inside out within an organization. And as a public school district in Pennsylvania, that means it's the people, regardless of position, who are working together with our governance board and others in order to strengthen within so that our outcomes the Baldrige framework in our mind and a lot of the pursuit of excellence is doing so many of the little things that are inside that people can't really see or necessarily understand, but it's that hard work on the inside that really produces great results at the end. Next slide, Kristen. So our game plan for today, share a little bit about ourselves, but there's really two fundamental concepts that are in bold: an intentionally organic approach to improvement. And what I mean by that is you'll see that we sort of took things as they were priorities, and as we were working on those processes or areas of focus, our understanding and awareness of the framework helped drive how we did some of that work. And then the second part was in our journey when we began to really ask the big questions, and the big questions speak to results, and that is it effective and how do we know? So we'll sort of talk about those two big ideas as we move through the presentation today. Next slide. So Bob shared a little bit of this in his intro, and so we are a community that has continued to grow and develop. We're a suburban school district in northern Allegheny County in the Pittsburgh area. And on the right side of this screen, you see sort of a snapshot of what is page 1 of the organizational profile within our level 3 application for the Mid-Atlantic Alliance. And who we are is really best described by that org profile, because it speaks to all elements of our mission, vision, values, our educational programs and service offerings, our workforce, our strategic challenges, advantages, and so on. And so we'll finish today's presentation talking a bit more about the org profile, but we are strongly focused on our mission, which is to focus on learning for every student every day. You see that at the bottom of the slide. And we really view that as our compass. Our strategic plan is our map. And in order to pursue that mission, we know that it involves not only quality educational programs within the classroom, but it's all of the other experiences that occur and diverse opportunities outside of the classroom that are critical as well. Next slide. This just gives you an indication. We have 3 primary schools that are K-3. They merge together at our upper elementary school, grades 4 through 6. We have middle schools, grades 7 and 8, and then high school 9 through 12. We've identified some of our key partners important to our mission. So this sort of is not the end, but a recent presentation. And the reason we selected this today is that I can't think of a greater honor than an organizational recognition, because the number of hands, the amount of sweat, blood, tears, and laughter that have led to performance improvement of Pine Richland are significant. When I see this picture, it makes me think about all of the different stakeholders that are so critical to any organization, in our case, a school organization. So we have board members represented, we have our senior leadership team members, building principals, teachers, support staff professionals, students, parents, representatives of our 2 townships, Pine and Richland Township. We have key partners, we have state legislators. So we have, out of this group of 30, we are really touching across all aspects of our community and our schools. And so it's with great pride, and that's that inside out concept, that it requires intentional collaboration. It requires knowledge and skills in order to continue to grow and improve. We are humbled to be able to represent our staff and our community in sharing today. And so we won't go further than what Bob said, but more information, if you would want it, you can always email us. We'll have that at the end, and it's on the website. Next slide. So this is a question we include, and it's sort of a lead into our one of our first topics, but we include this in our interview sequence when we are hiring administrators or leaders in various positions in the district. So we say, which is more important, process or results? We ask them to claim one of those and then explain their thinking. And so really the intention behind the question isn't necessarily a quote right end quote answer, but it's really to understand the thought process of the person that we're interviewing. And regardless of what they claim, either process or results and why, we generally push back on the opposite answer just to see how they react to the question. And so we do have an answer for Pine Richland that if somebody's interested, they can type it in and we'll answer it later. But it's really the fundamental question that led to our journey over the last 10 years. And so we'll speak to some of those pieces. Next slide. Most people on this webinar are likely very familiar, with the framework, the hockey puck view of what the Baldrige Performance Excellence Framework looks like. And the reality is that it's a little bit overwhelming. So if we have education organizations on this webinar who are at the early stages of work, it is really challenging to think about all of the various aspects of the framework and what they might mean within a school setting. And there's a humility that comes with working with the framework, that no matter how long the organization or person has been working with it, the learning continues to happen. And that understanding, the humility of being able to recognize both the responsibility and opportunity of leadership is so important. But awareness is where it begins. And so being aware that there's a framework that is proven, that is non-prescriptive, and then getting started is the first part. Our understanding and awareness continues to increase every year, both at Pine Richland and in general around performance excellence. And so just being aware of this, particularly in the education sector, which is one of the, I would say, less represented sectors in the framework, is really an important concept. Next slide. So when we think about our journey 10 years ago and now, what we've pulled here are the images, with permission, from that you've likely seen if you've ever looked at the framework. And on the left side, we see this from fighting fires to innovation, which is an analogy for learning. And on the right side, we see steps toward a mature process. And these two images really reflect what we have lived and experienced here at Pine Richland. And so, are these accurate? Yes. And can an organization with disciplined, intentional, thoughtful effort progress through these stages of maturity and improve? The answer is also an absolute yes, but it does require, again, knowledge, skill, discipline, and perseverance. And so we'll talk about some of those intentionally organic steps that we've taken. Next slide. This is something that we use in our district. We don't often have ADLI and LETSI there for the process evaluation factors and results factors, but we talk about process, results, and integration. And where you see our mission there, every student, every day, and we talk about the word every is what makes that compelling. With 4,600 students, there is incredible diversity in need, age, developmental level, and so we really have a compelling and important mission in front of us. Where we started was in the yellow. So it truly started almost a decade ago with a large Post-it paper and a Sharpie, and drawing that image, the green continuous improvement loop. And so what that loop reflects to us, and we didn't get lost in Baldrige language or ADLI language, but what that image reflects is we want to strive for continuous improvement. And continuous improvement is not a straight line. It would be wonderful if it was, but the reality is as we build approaches to whatever the topic is, we're going to have make mistakes, we're going to see successes, we're going to have cycles of learning. Those cycles of learning are what's reflected by the loops. And if we are thoughtful, knowledgeable in our approach, over time, we're going to continue to get better, and we're going to see the learning cycles get refined tighter and tighter as our maturity increases. And so that image of a green continuous improvement loop is something that we use and talk about in our district. We talk about taking a step up and to the right, and that really means continuing to hunger for improvement to be more effective at what we're doing. So we're going to start with process. Next slide. And getting started, I'm going to share an example of my very first day. So July 1, 2013, and it was a conversation that the Director of Human Resources and I had in my office. So we'll go to the next slide. So the Director of Human Resources on the first day and came in and said, we have a principal opening. And I responded, what's our process for hiring a principal? And there was a little bit of a pause, and the answer was, well, we've done a lot of things. I said, okay, well, what have we done? And it was sort of, well, we've done a little this, but no real specifics to that. So I said, okay, well, what have we done most recently? And again, there was a bit of a hesitation. And so as we think about intentionally organic, the very first morning of the very first day, we had a vacant position for a leader in our schools, and we had not yet taken the steps. And based on some of those quick questions, we did not have something that was systematic and documented in terms of our approach. And so we hit the pause button for a second. We brought in the assistant superintendent, and the three of us with a legal pad sketched what you see on the right side of the screen. And what's on that is less important than the concept that it really took 15 to 20 minutes in order to design a systematic step-by-step approach at a high level of what do we do in terms of hiring a principal? What are our steps? We reduced that to writing. It became one of our first sort of systematic approaches. And then we began to add additional information as we designed questions and tasks. But this to me is an example of the journey. We had a principal opening, which led to the question of what are we going to do, which asked what have we done? And because we didn't have that documented in any way, shape, or form, we know that the ability to repeat it, to do it again, to improve it was going to be limited. So it wasn't rocket science, and it didn't take too long, but ultimately we were able to get our, build our first process literally on the first day. Next slide. So we started to feel pretty good. And over time, we developed similar hiring processes for all of the other position types that we had, teachers and others. And this is important for deployment, right? So we know that having a repeatable process matters because then we can later evaluate it and improve it. But we also know if we're going to deploy that across an organization, and we have, let's say, teacher hiring happening across 6 schools in our case, that we want to be able to deploy that in relevant ways with the right people. And so we built those approaches and we refined them incrementally as we implemented over those early years. And then later, we weren't ready right away, but later we began to focus more on the question, the big questions. Are they effective and how do we know? So we could have a systematic hiring process. We could deploy it in relevant ways. We can even improve it, but are we improving it based upon facts, evidence, and information? How do we know whether it's effective and how are we improving things? And so on this slide, you see for the first time on the bottom, as we introduce the idea of results, we see the histogram with the goal of a beneficial trend. We see the black line that's horizontal is sort of a benchmark towards comparison. And so we're looking at levels and trends and comparisons, a part of asking those big questions. So again, we went through multiple cycles, but when we started to ask the big question, and we're going to go back to that idea of a principal, which is a leader in a school system, obviously, we realized that we had some significant work to do, and we needed to redesign, not just make an incremental improvement, but we really needed to step back and reevaluate the manner in which we approached leadership hires at Pine Richland. And that'll take us to the next slide. So again, the results orientation is what led us there. Next slide, Kristen. So for several years now, and I'm using this as an example, we have probably 500 examples of this type of thing, but we went from not having a systematic approach to developing and refining one. And then as we began to evaluate effectiveness, it really caused us to step back and be even more thoughtful in design. And so this slide is an important concept, and I think regardless of industry or sector, that we picked this because we thought it was a relevant example, hiring leaders. And what we realized is that our process, for the most part, was focused on what's listed here as SMART, which is the knowledge, skills, and experience specific to that leadership position. So in a principal position, it's relevant experience as a principal, assistant principal, or leader. It's the degrees and certifications that someone has. But we were missing some things that had evolved over time that we needed to better understand and more thoughtfully evaluate during the course of the interview process. And so this example, where were we then 10 years ago? Where are we now? When someone says, well, what are you looking for in a principal? Or what are you looking for in an assistant superintendent? Or what are you looking for in a director or in a leadership role? We're focused on what we call our medal stand. So we have gold, silver, and bronze. They're all important. They're all on the medal stand. But in the first position in gold is healthy. And this is the who and the why of leadership. And so Patrick Lencioni, who's a well-known author, speaker, consultant, he has a number of books around organizational health. And some of the concepts of his work and others are what form healthy. So we're looking at what's the motive. Is the person leading for reward or for responsibility, primarily on a continuum? And are they hungry for the position, and how they demonstrate that hunger? Do they demonstrate humility, and so on? And so this idea of how do we evaluate and select and use health healthy characteristics as a dimension of the selection process took first position. The second aha we had through our fact-based learning was that given the tempo and expectations of our district, if some of the what we call manage to lead skills are not present, then the pace of the work and the expectations for work become a bit overwhelming. And so these are all the things that matter, but are usually never included in a development program. Like, how do you manage your calendar, your to-do lists, your prioritization, email meetings, project management, and so on. So for a principal or for a leader, these are the things that help keep the head above water. These are the things that promote not only efficiency, but effectiveness. What we determined in this redesign was that the specific skills and knowledge of the position took third place. And so how do we then redesign our selection process to be able to understand this? So we'll walk through a little bit of that. So the steps are not significantly different, right? We have recruitment, we have screening, we begin to go through various rounds of interviews. Those rounds include a diverse representation of our workforce and community. So there's a lot of things that we embed within that, but I'll focus a little bit more on the high level changes that we made. Next slide. So this is how we evaluate healthy. So now we have a couple of members of our interview panel, and they are members who work through all rounds of the process. So the same people, for example, a director of human resources, or it could be me, could be one of our assistant superintendents, depending on the position. But over the course of multiple interviews, artifacts, and look-fors, we are evaluating the candidate in each of these dimensions across that continuum. And so we're using evidence and information through the selection process to be able to, not that anybody's going to be all bright green on the right of everything, and we all live sort of on the continuum somewhere. But generally speaking, we're looking for evidence that the person is shifting, greenish yellow or green across most of these critical areas, which we know then will better ensure a healthy fit to the culture and beliefs of the organization. Next slide. For manage to lead, we make a lot of requests in terms of prior to meetings. We're looking for evidence of things that have already happened. So while we might ask candidates to prepare something as a part of a performance task, sometimes we do that giving them time in advance. Sometimes we do it when they arrive for the interview. They have a certain amount of time to do that work. But we also ask them to provide to us past evidence of things they have done in their current role in each of these areas of competency. Then we can evaluate not what they say they will do or prepare for, but the actual work of what they have been doing in their current position. Next slide. So again, the healthy was gold on the medal stand, managed to lead silver, and then smart, which is this position-specific subject matter expertise. We have a rubric that you see here. And so if you look at number 3, when asked a question, they're able to provide sort of an overarching holistic response with at least one example. But as we move from 3 to 4 and 4 to 5, you can almost see how we've taken aspects of the scoring domain guidelines in the framework, and we've embedded them in some of the expectations around what a very mature answer would look like. And so now we have panels of interview. We have a number of interviewers who are reflective of our demographics and workforce segments and other parts of our organization. We have people in that panel and room who are evaluating candidates for very specific reasons and purposes, and then we're able to put all of those things together as we're making decisions. So we're spending the most time in this webinar of all the time on this example because it shows, where we've come from, which is not having a systematic approach to hiring a principal, to feeling better about our approach and deploying it effectively, but not really refining it based on evidence, to eventually a complete redesign. And so just like that, we feel a little better today. We also have the humility to know that 5 years from now, we might look back at this and say, what were we thinking about? And we might be at a totally different level. Next slide. So that's that idea of integration. And Kristen's gonna take a different tact on this with the next example, and then we'll try to tie those two examples of selection and onboarding together.
So a second example that we had for you is the question of how do we meet induction requirements? And by way of background, induction is a requirement from the Pennsylvania Department of Education for our new teachers to the profession. And really it initially here was more of a compliance-based, non-differentiated approach to onboarding our staff in a way that helped them get up and running, functioning, teaching in the classroom, connected to others in their department. And initially, it was not a high area of priority because there were many other things we were working on. A little later, we'll get into an example around ensuring that our written curriculum was captured, thinking of knowledge management, it's documented, we're revisiting it, we're making adjustments. So by the time we completed that work, we were able to turn our focus back to this area. And it was actually lifted up as a long-term goal in our strategic plan under a category of workforce development. And we implemented and rebranded and remodified what was an induction program to be called the PR Academy, the Pine Richland Academy. And it became a much more robust experience for teachers with a more mature approach to folding in individuals into the culture of our organization. And we were really focusing on the common language that underpins that. There were initially binders full of different papers that represented sorts of things we were doing, and it guided an exchange process between a mentee and a mentor involved in the academy to try to deepen their competencies. And we had in-person, face-to-face sessions approximately quarterly throughout the year where we were helping them, work through this. So we were feeling a little better. That wasn't just a compliance exercise. We had deepened those competencies a little bit more. So then we asked ourselves the question, is it effective? And based on the first iteration, we had developed activities that were a competency check with some interactive stations for the teachers, the mentees, if you will, to rotate through. And we were doing different activities. And what we learned was that the retention of each of the elements that we hoped our mentees would gain and keep was really lacking. It wasn't the level of effectiveness we wanted, and it was somewhat artificial. So we once again entered into a cycle of learning and sat back to think about our approach and how we make the competencies that we had for our teachers more relevant, and very plainly stated each of the 10 overarching big ideas and learning goals that you can see on the side of the slide there on the right side. And essentially it became a rubric so that we would be able to check in on those. And we thought about creating the relevance, and there is no better way to reach across all discipline areas in a school for a teacher other than the lesson plan. It's really where, if you will, the rubber meets the road, and we have our curriculum, the instructional techniques, and the assessment techniques all intersecting, and teachers can really use that, and it's something that speaks to them. They're focused on it day in and day out, and so it became a very practical way to engage the teachers around this. And so pieces of that, and you can see on the rubric itself, the mission, vision, values, the structure of our strategic plan, the ways in which we use our MVV as our compass and the strategic plan as our map, as Dr. Miller had mentioned. We have a model for teaching and learning, which really for us is a Venn diagram you'll see later on, where it's curriculum, instruction, and assessment, knowing that the more tightly aligned each of those components are, the more likely we have a guarantee of learning outcomes, and we can assess and monitor students' growth and achievement results against that. So we wanted our staff to also ensure that they were interacting with that written curriculum that we mentioned. It does live in Google Docs, and so all of them have editing and commenting access, and they're able to make suggestions and refinements. Our goal is to never actually have to write curriculum again as one large action, because it's continuously happening as we are making refinements and reflections. And so with the lesson plans, we really wanted to come together and have a common philosophy of what elements should be consistently implemented on lesson plans, how we define each of those. So again, the common language of learning goals and learning activities. We have 3 big ideas of assessment that we utilize to measure student outcomes, looking at the levels of assessment and the knowledge and how they can apply it. We wanted our teachers to be able to differentiate by individual students who have special education supports, whether it be on the gifted end of things or on the learning support side. So really, this became a driver for teachers to know. They're handed this, by the way, at the very beginning of the academy, so they know exactly what the outcomes will be. Each of our sessions focus on a few key components. We do checks throughout, checks at the end, and the activities that the mentees and mentors are working on in between focus on these, and they bring pieces back to discuss as a whole group and really have really high level dialogue, intellectually stimulating activities and discussions as a group with others who are involved. And so then once again, we step back to measure the effectiveness of the academy, and we found that our new approach, being relevant, yielded success, and the teachers were retaining that content because it was authentically connected to what they were doing day in and day out. And we celebrated, but then in our true continuous improvement spirit, quickly turned to say, what else could we be doing? And that is when we quickly identified that we were missing significant portions of our workforce. So we had focused in on teachers based on that requirement from the state. However, we have paraeducators, administrators, custodians, and secretaries working with us here as well, who are key workforce groups. And regardless of the level of tenure, experience, et cetera, even teachers, not just those who are new, but any their students and their unique needs in mind, and we'll continue reflecting and striving for improvements in the future.
Go back, if you would, just one second. So again, as Kristen said, blind spots are the ultimate in humility. I mean, when we really think about the fact that it took us so long to arrive at a place where we had a really comprehensive and well-developed onboarding program for paraeducators. We have 72 to 74 paraeducators usually in any given year. And to not have a really effective and well-designed onboarding, I mean, it's just really terrible. But it wasn't because we're not good people. It's not because we don't want effectiveness. We just didn't see it. And so part of what our journey has done for us in learning from other organizations, in learning from other sectors, is that humility of knowing that blind spots exist. And when we become aware, we're not stressed out about it. We just thoughtfully bring the right people in a room and begin to develop what we're doing. Next slide. So, part of our journey over the last 10 years is increasing maturity. It's increasing integration. It's connection between process and results, and processes and systems within areas. And so we just want to point to a little bit of an example of where were we then designing, step-by-step process for an interview or about the selection of a principal, to where are we now? Next slide. So now we think differently. So from a process to a system. So what is our end-to-end system? And so what we're showing here are a couple examples of that. First is workforce capability and capacity, right? And how does that integrate, in our case, with our program of studies, course selections, enrollment projections, and other tools that we use? That then leads to knowing who and how many we need and what skills and knowledge they need. That integrates then with our hiring process. We see that, on the right. The hiring process, then at the bottom, you see it integrates with the relevant PR Academy. Our custodial PR Academy, very, very different, obviously, than teacher, than paraeducator, than secretary, than administrator. if we were to continue talking about this end-to-end system, we would move into things like professional development, performance management system, and how all of those fit together, not only on a yearly cycle, but then throughout the life cycle of a person, an employee within our workforce. So again, this is sort of that part back to the idea of arrows pointing different ways to beginning to see arrows aligned, and then ultimately to see some integration between key processes and the knowledge of effective results. Next slide. So we picked most of our topics for today's webinar because whether you're in education or some other sector, you're interviewing key people. It's really, they're just examples of the journey that we've been on. We are going to mention, again, a specific one for our sector now, which is written curriculum. But we know that that'll be hopefully a direct hit for those audience members who are in education. But for others, we hope you can, transfer some of our experience to your area. Next slide. So we have incredible kids and staff at Pine Richland, but what we didn't necessarily have was a written curriculum that ensured horizontally, so across all third grade classrooms, for example, if we have 15 sections of third grade, each of those 15 sections may be positive and learning's happening, but if they're not consistent, then when students move from third to fourth, we see some gaps and concerns. And so we needed to really develop an effective written curriculum. In this case, through the tool was through Google, but the process is something that the how, the inside out, is really a core belief and value. And so if we're going to work on curriculum, we're not going to buy it. We're going to engage people within our organization of doing the work. And so how do we address that short term to long term? Our process actually took longer than what you see on the slide. It wasn't really until 2016 that we really were at a place where we were starting to feel good about that. And so this little logic model, though, helped us, think about and talk about some of the key components. Next slide. What we needed that we didn't have, and this happens differently in different school organizations, is we really needed to reestablish a teacher leader structure. It had been in place at one time during some difficult financial times. It was stopped, but the reality is it's not possible to move an education organization forward without leadership roles, formal and informal, within teachers and with other workforce segments. So with support of our board and creativity and approach, we reestablished that structure, and all of those chairs together we refer to as the Academic Leadership Council. And so out of that council, we had some individuals who were part of a pilot design team. We designed a step-by-step guide to curriculum writing. We tested that approach with those pilot teachers across discipline areas, so that before we deployed that across 330 teachers, we had already worked through sort of the approach that we're going to take so that we could repeat it. We would get to a product, we would prevent errors and rework that was necessary. And because different departments, have, music curriculum looks different than math curriculum, looks a bit different than social studies, we wanted to ensure that the model was systematic, but also flexible enough to be useful. And so those were some, again, where were we then? That's where we were at that point. And then Kristen will talk about how that really evolved significantly.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to first call your attention to the left side of the slide. So you can see that Venn diagram there. That is the model for teaching and learning, as we have deemed it here. It is foundations of basic education and design. We have curriculum as the upper circle. The left circle is instruction and the right circle is assessment. And so this was when we were speaking about tightly aligning each of those areas. Learning happens in the middle. So where the intersection of the Venn diagram occurs is what we call the sweet spot. Below that, you'll see the multi-tiered systems for support. And so this is a hierarchy. The majority of students, approximately 80%, receive tier 1 instruction, and that is exactly what they need with differentiation within that level. Some require more intensive supports with a lower number of students at tiers 2 or 3, so 2 and 3 going up vertically. And below that, you'll see our continuum of services. And together, each of these three images are what we call our learning system. And in order to look at that learning system, and we sort of do it program by program, we have adopted a model called the in-depth program review. And you are looking at a process diagram that we have developed here in-house to capture what that is. So you should recognize the upper left image of that, as we were just looking at that with Dr. Miller. So that was the curriculum review process model. And once that was completed, we began going through a review process and first tested it with our science and our health and physical education departments in the 2016-2017 school year. And we have refined it ever since, so it has been tweaked along the way. And if you were to go to our website, you could actually see the 9 departments that have gone through this process. And we are presenting 3 additional departments in June of this year. And so it started again with the analysis that happened, and then there was a deep dive to review the program. What you see are 4 committees: research, exemplar, connections, and data. They are interdependent, and all of the individuals who are participating in our review. So let's take English language arts, for example. We had special education teachers, gifted education teachers, folks from each grade level, each course represented. That department in and of itself is probably one of the largest that we have if you take into consideration English language learners, interventions, special education resources, etc. So not everyone could sit in the room, but we needed to make sure we had each lens present. And all of those individuals were divided up onto these subcommittees, and we begin working through things. So research is focused on best practices, professional organization recommendations, peer-reviewed works, published journals, etc., that are out there to look for themes, areas that, as we do an environmental scan, we see as important external to our organization. Within Exemplar, we are looking at other K-12 schools who have best practices and are recognized either as a district, a school, a program, or perhaps just a teacher within that organization. And each time we go through the process, based on the committee, we look at key requirements to select those exemplar school districts. Are there awards that exist in that area? For instance, we have Scholastic Art Awards, and they give out golden keys and so forth. So if there are organizations who have been nominated with many of those, as we go through our art in-depth program review this year, we are looking at that, and we want to understand what it is about their process and programs that helps them achieve those sorts of outcomes. Connections is really focused on community-based organizations, companies, and future employers for our students, as well as colleges and universities. And they're able to share the relevance of that content area or program, whatever we are looking at the time, from their particular organizational lens. You know, what competencies do our graduates need to be successful where they are? Are there experiences that could be afforded to our students while they're here in terms of partnerships or mentorships? And what, after they leave us, you know, what other recommendations might they have? And data looks at both internal and external data sources. So we're looking at course requests, program size, if there's attrition over time, the number of courses, instructional hours per year, students' actual learning outcomes, really that full K-12 experience within the program, what sorts of data are yielded, and how can we leverage those to better understand our practices. And so what you see on this slide is the science and health and PE departments. You can see buckets, as we call them, next to each of those. So under science, there's STEAM, technology, inquiry, and project-based learning. We have standards, and also there are reading competencies connected to the NGSS types of standards. So thinking through those, we begin collecting information, and we go through an affinity process where topics start to emerge. We sometimes change the labels on the buckets. It's a very nebulous process. Things are coming together. We describe this process as messy and nonlinear, which feels uncomfortable at times for the individuals going through it. But as we begin to see emerging themes across both the subcommittees' findings as well as the buckets, it becomes very clear what those emerging recommendations would be. And we have to take those emerging recommendations through an action priority matrix. The resources that we have at our disposal are people, time, and money, and we're unable to continuously lengthen the school day. And anything that we do to increase time in one area or spend monies in one area, it does have a ripple effect. That's the wavy lines below the balance there. On the rest of the organization, and we need to understand what that means and determine what is going to yield a high impact with a reasonable and sustainable effort that we can bring forward. And those tend to be the final recommendations. They're usually 8 to 10 per our departments or programs, and we transfer those into action plans, and they're implemented over a several year time span. And it's not just the teachers that sit in that room that do that. We leverage our leadership systems and that inside out approach that Dr. Miller spoke about in order to implement recommendations from in-depth program reviews and even to identify what some of those might be. So on the right side, you see staff, students, parents, and community. We regularly leverage town halls and most recently have been incorporating leadership councils. We have leadership councils for things such as the Technology Leadership Council, Transforming the Future. That was helping us guide decisions around virtual and in-person learning opportunities throughout the pandemic and then what we hope to be beyond. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also we just launched a Sustainability Leadership Council. So they connect oftentimes to key initiatives within our strategic plan. But those councils assist us with getting the input necessary to further define priorities and action steps, and they help us to remain accountable to our goals and to share our progress monitoring and results transparently with the community. We have Academic Leadership Council members, the ALCs, and we have building level tech coaches, BLTCs, and other leadership representatives like that who are formally embedded throughout the organization. ALCs represent grade levels, they represent departments, and these are teacher leaders who liaise and interface with the administration and then also help lead their team in terms of building relationships and the team itself, as well as engaging in the tasks that we have defined at hand. We also have obviously formal principals, assistant principals, other supervisors in our senior leadership team who make up our overarching administrative team. And we work with our governance, our school board, in order to align and make sure that we are making good on all those promises we've set out to deliver on within our strategic plan itself. As another example of continuous improvement in action, I want to call your attention to the far left. This was at the time, an academic achievement report. Since then, recognized as an academic achievement and growth report. And at the time that this report was published, the achievement one on the left from September of 2013, we were really proud to be putting our results, and this was specific to student achievement on standardized assessment measures at the time. It did have some levels of segmentation in terms of gender or IEP status for the students, and putting that out there and making public in one streamlined location all of those results was very important to us. And so that was kind of a launch point. And if you see the cover in the middle, 2016, as we mentioned, we started to include measures from our Pennsylvania value-added assessment system, which gets at the growth, the annual growth that our students will make, how they're performing against the projections based on prior achievement levels. And we began creating action plans, and teachers for the first time were integrated in helping design how it would hit the classroom. And then fast forward to what you see as the Data for Action 2020 Academic Achievement and Growth Report, where we were truly leveraging that model for teaching and learning, using these assessment results to really push down into the classroom level, altering the curriculum, altering the instructional approach, and making public, again, data that would not otherwise be publicly visible. So those Pennsylvania value-added measures have quintile reports that can reflect a number of things across those tested content areas. And these were things we wanted to share. And not just how we had done, but how we performed against benchmarks. So we have comparisons who are relevant to us. So the top 10% of the state tends to be where we are performing and competing in terms of our outcomes. We are meeting the state average with ease annually, so that was not a relevant comparison for us. So really taking the time to sort through and find the other data that would be a great point for us. So not only in terms of the aesthetics of the cover in each of these academic achievement and growth reports, but really in the content within, it has become a much more sophisticated and integrated process. And there's so much more to say about that. And if you have interest in any of that, I do encourage you to reach out.
Okay, so our non-education sector people, we just went deep education, K-12. So we appreciate you hanging in there with us. given the time, I'm just going to mention a couple things on the next slides, and our website has a lot of information, and you'll see our contact information. We're always happy to talk and share. We're happy to share what we feel good about. We're also happy to share where we're struggling or where we need to improve. So we're honest to a fault in terms of where we think we are as an organization. So the last thing is navigating forests into trees. Where have we been? Where are we now? And the framework has helped us do that. Next slide, Kristen. And so, like many organizations, we did not necessarily have a sticky MVB, and we didn't have a strategy. We had a strategic plan, but not at the level of utility that we thought was important for improvement. So next slide. We have reached a place where sort of the compass, mission, vision, values, and everything on this slide has a purpose. So if you go to the Pine Richland website, if you're interested in this kind of thing, we have narrated podcasts that are available there that walk through our entire process for identifying mission, vision, values. Go ahead to the next slide, Kristen. You'll also see on our website, again, podcasts that lay out exactly how we go through the strategic planning process. We have a 4-year long-term horizon. You'll see and hear about the steps and who's included in that. It's a very open, inclusive process. Next slide. It ultimately gets organized into categories over that 4-year with long-term goals and short-term actions. Next slide. And then very specifically, you see how we tie in our actions to our mission and plan. So earlier in this presentation, we talked about the hiring process and then the PR Academy. And you can see how over a 4-year horizon, that long-term goal then gets broken down into specific short-term actions. And we publicly report on each of these dimensions. We provide a dashboard view and narrative update for key initiatives. So again, it's all there on the site if anyone is interested. Next slide. We just gave you 57 minutes on why consider the framework. So we, again, it's that an opportunity for continuous improvement and pursuit of excellence. Next slide. The org profile is a way to focus on that. And we say, it's the forest and the trees. So it starts by a tree, a process. How do you hire a principal? Eventually it integrates into a section of the forest and the forest as a whole. So the more mature we get, the more we really see how sort of the ecosystem of the organization works together. Go ahead, Kristen. Next slide. Next slide. So again, I mentioned at the beginning, org profile is a great place to begin. When we first were working on our org profile many years ago, we had a lot of gaps and holes and things we just hadn't considered. And now it is really, obviously up to more comprehensive and mature. Next slide. So to put faces with our mission and vision, we see on the left, kindergartners. We have 3, as a custom, 3 kindergarten students speak at commencement every year. And on the right, we see our graduates that we hope are prepared to make their mark on the world. And so that's sort of a little bit of how our vision is in action. Last slide. I'm sure Margot's getting nervous. Here's our contact information. We are more than happy to talk with people in education or outside education. So just send us a note. We're both extremely responsive. And if we can't help you, we'll get you connected to the right person. Margot, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And we did get a couple just comments, so I will share those with you. One is that this is highly relevant to non-educational organizations. So I think you hit the mark with a lot of things that can be transferred over to other industries. And the other comment was, I've been asked to coach and support a newly appointed dean of a business college, and this would be very helpful to him. I would love to have a conversation with you and him. So you may be contacted by some of our participants today.
Super, thank you.
So thank you so much, Brian and Kristen, for sharing your story. For all of you on, we are close to the end here and running out of time, but they have provided you with their contact information, which is also in the handout in the control panel. And so if you do have some questions, please reach out to them. I'm going to show my screen now again and share with you our upcoming webinar, which is on June 16th, and it will be conducted by Kurt Schock, who is a longtime Baldrige examiner, and he's the chair of our board at the Partnership for Excellence, and he does coaching, but his presentation is going to be on leadership coaching as a strategy for performance excellence. And you can register for that at the link here, which is in the handouts, and I will also send them out to everyone. So that is on June 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern time. But thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you found the content to be helpful. If you are interested in starting your Baldrige journey, here are the contact information for each of the programs that are hosted by this hosting this webinar. If you don't see your program here, you can reach out to me and I'll connect you with the right person. But thanks everyone. Thank you, Brian and Kristen, and everyone have a great rest of your week. Bye everyone.